happiness goes to the adult. And the adult has a stability, often centers their life on either what they regard as their higher power. That could be a deity, but it could also be a set of core values that are quite universal in nature. And they can free themselves from the adolescence anxieties relatively quickly. We have lots of characters in literature who are like this, and many of them are thought of as wise elders, as the grandparent or the grandmother who's so grounded and helps wisdom to manifest in those in the family.
Bruce Fritch is a leadership consultant who accesses the human brilliance of people and organizations. He sees human brilliance, our gifts, talents, and experiences, as the wellspring for the best of human endeavors. A former naval officer and bank executive, and a consultant to small and large enterprises throughout the world over nearly a 50-year career, he is a student of leadership and culture. His clients cross industry sectors from financial services to healthcare to manufacturing to startup ventures. Bruce is also an artist. A prolific writer and photographer, he is a keen observer of the human condition. His work as a consultant and his artistry has the voice of a prophet, calling his audience to excellence and higher purpose. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Bruce, welcome. It's great to have you.
Well, it's good to be here with you, Mark.
Bruce, how do you describe to people what you do?
Well, I advise business leaders. I've had an odd career. I've been primarily working with CEOs and boards since I was 23, if you count an admiral and a commodore in the Navy. And it's not a career I designed. What I was interested in is doing my thing, as they say. I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, that I wanted to have my own enterprise, whatever that might be, and I kept delaying what that would be until it became apparent. And the way I describe it, if I were sitting next to you on a plane, as somebody might ask the question, and I would say I'm an advisor to business leaders on growth and organizational effectiveness, leadership, often, and I've done it for a long time.
Bruce, you've written extensively about the current leadership landscape in corporate and civic life, and much of what you have to say is not positive. You've written that many of our leaders lack character and do nothing more than manage mediocrity, that American business is stuck in adolescence, that we are in a broken paradigm of employee disengagement. Are things really that bad?
Well, they're that bad in the context of they could be extraordinarily better. It's not that we've crashed and there's no way of reassembling the plane. We're simply flying in a fairly careless way, and the interesting thing to me is the insidious hold that has occurred given the proximity to the ability to pay oneself disproportionately high amounts, and to say that being profitable is akin to being brilliant. There are vast differences between what it takes to be profitable and human brilliance. And if you have an organization that truly is brilliant, they would probably be quite profitable. The the alley that we're in, that we're stuck in, is thinking that if we're profitable, we're brilliant. And that has a tendency to cause teams, organizations, social communities to truncate their aspiration and not do the practices, not operate in a fashion that really does cause brilliance to manifest and to flourish. It's there within each of us, and the trick is to not get complacent, and also for the whole journey forward to be embracing human potential, welcoming each individual, causing them to feel that they're seen and really needed in the context of the team or the organization. The organization that does that well is very, very unusual, extraordinarily unusual. So I don't like talking about how difficult this is, or how much disengagement there is in the workplace. I don't enjoy that, but the contrast, as in photography, contrast is an important thing. And to the extent that we're sort of stuck in thinking that everything's great, at times I find it's important to hold up the data that indicates that much more fun, much more joy and happiness, and far more brilliance, and I think far more productive endeavor leading to greater profitability is absolutely possible.
Was there a time when you think the leadership landscape in American corporations was any better than it is today?
Yes. Yeah, I've been doing this a long time. My biggest response to that question is that I've sat in boardrooms and in the CEO's office and in C-suite retreats and daily conversations, and witnessed over the years, particularly since the late 1980s, a decline in what I would call real leadership, and an increase in both greed and superficiality among American business leaders. Today we see that's quite evident also in the American political terrain. But my life has been in helping business leaders, so we have a considerable amount of evidence of various kinds that indicates this decline over the years.
Bruce, we've spoken in terms of American business and society. You've traveled and consulted internationally. In your view, is leadership different elsewhere?
I think it is different elsewhere. It's remarkable to see how, at least up until recent years, the American business leader has been viewed as sort of the one to emulate. But I see smart management most everywhere, and I see a shallowness in leadership most everywhere as well. An exception to that, I worked in South Africa for a time, and if you think about apartheid and how horrible that is in terms of the conscious and unconscious experience of people in a country and in that economy on a daily basis, I worked with leaders in 2005 and 2006, business leaders who combined their skills and time with political leaders, all dedicated to redesigning the culture in order to embrace human potential. It was absolutely extraordinary, and I would point to that as quite an exception to to what I've said.
In your writing, you've mentioned Nelson Mandela more than once as a leader worth emulating. Since you've now just referenced South Africa, do you want to speak briefly to what you think of when you think of Nelson Mandela as a leader?
Well, I think that he embodied a profound understanding of what some people have termed the human experiment. His thinking went far beyond race and gender and other ways of classifying and cordoning people off. He looked at human potential, and I think that's extraordinary, particularly when you look at the experience that he had and where he was when he was probably putting a fine point on those thoughts.
Okay. Bruce, you've written that, quote, our social and behavioral self-aspects are largely acquired and shaped through emulation, end quote. That programs, initiatives, corporate statements of philosophy, business objectives are all secondary exercises to the power of role modeling. Can you explain further?
The power of emulation is, I think, one of the things, if understood, that would cause communities and families and certainly businesses to operate in a different fashion. The individual learns via observation and emulation, and they place a premium on the emulation of those individuals who appear to have, quote, made it, or individuals who are highly authorized. So initially, of course, those are the God figures of mom and dad, or whoever it is that's raising the kid. So we do strong emulation with parents. We go on into life and we emulate people who appear to have made it. To the extent that success is misunderstood as monetary wealth, we do a great deal of emulation of individuals who have high monetary wealth, not knowing about whether they're happy or how much good they do on a minute-by-minute basis. It's not an informed way of doing things. I would say it's more a phenomenon that's best explained by the anthropologist and the social psychologist. But my observation is that all social roles are acquired through emulation. We acquire the mental model for doing it. We do this both consciously and unconsciously, and leadership is one of the primary social roles that is acquired through emulation. So to the extent that we have leaders who are, as Richard Branson termed it, real leaders, as opposed to simply people in authority who are exercising their greed or their need for power and authority. If we have real leaders and we're emulating those, it has a tendency to align the world, to put people on a respectful footing, to enable teamwork, to enable individual enterprise. To the extent that we're not emulating that kind of leadership, it has a profound effect on the amplification of human insecurity.
When you have conversations with your clients, how much conversation is devoted to sort of the self-awareness of leadership, the self-awareness that comes with modeling for others, asking the leader to be mindful of that others will emulate them?
A great deal of it does. My way of proceeding, whether I'm conducting an offsite with a leadership group or working as an advisor to an individual leader, is to sit down in a confidential, in-depth interview to learn about them from birth to now, if you will, and to as clearly as I can understand the things that they've experienced. I'm always left with a great deal of respect if I do this well, respect for them, and awe in some cases, and so that's actually a journey through their life about things that are either influenced by leaders or leadership initiatives that they've taken, responsibilities that they've had. I'm never engaged by somebody who isn't in a leadership position, in a position of great authority. And so I find it's my responsibility to aid them in more fully appreciating who they are, more fully appreciating what has been their gift or gifts and talents, and how their experience has accumulated to opportunities that are in front of both of us at that moment or in the future. Those kinds of awarenesses, mirroring back these possibilities, I find are critically important. I view all of this not in a religious context, but, if you will, in a spiritual context, that each of us is here. We have the task of determining our destiny, our mission, our purpose. I'll use those terms interchangeably, and I try to take the history of the individual and pose to them possibilities for what theirs might be. I find the individual who is not navigating with a clarity about this is navigating in a somewhat superficial fashion. I feel that leadership must embody core human values or virtues. There needs to be a civilization uplift, or the possibility of strengthening civilization as a result of leadership, not simply strengthening net worth.
Of course, you bring your own history to this work, and there have been some powerful influences in your own life. You recently wrote an entry called Note to Self on Father's Day, reflecting on the impact of your father in your own life. Who was your father, and what has been his legacy in your work?
Well, my father was quite a powerful influence to me. I say in that article toward the top, it wasn't easy to be his son. That's not an admonishment of him. I'm just saying that it was a kind of a tall mountain to climb, and I'm still climbing. He was brilliant in many proven ways. He was an inventor, and he was enormously talented in many proven ways. He starred in track and in football and in leadership ways. He was the head of this and that, and yet at the same time, he had a great difficulty with anything that wasn't meritocratic. So the the autocratic situation, an organization that was autocratic and not meritocratic, was confounding to him. He didn't have patience for it. It ultimately very much limited his career. I've joked with my sisters that our dad couldn't spell psychology. It wasn't his way. He would rather apply his work ethic and his brilliance to something than try and soften a relationship with somebody who was perhaps intimidated by him or going after the same job. So as life is all research, my dad provided a certain laboratory for my for this lens that I've crafted about organizational effectiveness and leadership effectiveness and what it all really amounts to. And as I say, I feel like I'm continuing to learn, but I would certainly not be the same person without him.
Mm-hmm. What was his name?
Carl Fritch, and he was Carl F. Fritch Jr. After his dad.
What was your relationship with him as a young man?
Well, it wasn't buddies. He was very strict. He did not attend a lot of the things that I found myself doing. I got very involved in Boy Scouts and became an Eagle Scout. He didn't have anything to do with that. When I got my Eagle Scout award, my mother attended, my dad didn't. My dad was a football star and track star, and he did not attend any of my track meets, or I think he attended in high school and college maybe 2 football games. And at the same time, he would show up at critical moments. For instance, when I separated and subsequently divorced in my first marriage, he was the one who got on a plane, and he came and spoke with me and spoke with my wife at the time, and I've always been impressed by that.
In thinking about him, how do you think your memory and reflection of him informs your life as an adult now?
Well, I've certainly not been asked that question. It really, obviously, it gives me pause. He is... all the men in my family were college degreed engineers, 5 individuals. And I'm the only one who didn't get a degree in engineering. And so the science and a work ethic, very, very diligent work ethic, was part of our family culture. The science of understanding the why of something and how it worked and how it could work better is very much ingrained in me. I grew up in that. So in terms of standard of excellence and a science and an active inquiry and a hard work ethic, I think these are at least what I would respond to. I'll continue to ponder the question. I'm sure that there are things more subtle that I should be able to pronounce, but I'll work on it.
Tell me about your mom and her influence on you.
My mother was, she was equally unique in her own way. She was brilliant person, skipped 2 grades when she was coming through school. She was mentally ill. And so it was a bit of pickup sticks being in the childhood life that I led, and yet there was a lot of love. There were great family traditions. Family was really terribly important. You know, as the only son, I think that I've certainly been influenced strongly by a woman of such courage and intellectual power, and when she wasn't in a serious depression, her heart was very evident.
What was her name?
Her name was Elizabeth Lloyd, and growing up they called her Betty, but as an adult she preferred to be Elizabeth.
Bruce, your father and mother shaped and influenced you, and so did the United States Navy. What did you experience and learn in the Navy?
Well, I was predisposed to the Navy for several reasons. One is that I graduated as an undergraduate from DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana in 1968. So if you think about 68, quite a year. The draft was going on. I knew that I needed to have a plan for what to do in the eventuality of military service, and I wanted to be an officer. I was predisposed by my dad's dad, my grandfather, Grandpa Fritch, and my father being naval officers. I also wanted to get the best business management experience possible in the military. I wore glasses, and I'm nearsighted, and so I couldn't drive a plane or a ship, and I wanted the best business management experience, and my research said that that's as a supply officer in the U.S. Navy. I feel that was good research and that it's very valid. I applied to the Army and the Air Force and the Navy, and I believe I got into all 3 officer candidate programs, but was relieved to get into the Navy. And what the Navy provides is daily emulation of extraordinary organizational effectiveness, extraordinary leadership, with a minimization of what we variously call politics. It was on the plane of effectiveness, not on the plane of politics, and it was absolutely the best place for me to be. I was supply officer of a destroyer, and then I was given the pick of assignments and became an admiral's aide and worked with really masterful people, wonderful experience, very developmental in the best possible way.
Do you remember your admiral?
I do, yeah. Joseph Leon Howard, and an extraordinary person, sort of an aristocrat when aristocrats were still in American culture. He happened to be the individual who was assigned the task of leading the report by the Navy defending the use of the aircraft carrier. As a supply officer, an interesting thing to do, but a brilliant guy, Harvard University graduate, and it was quite a privilege and quite a challenge to work with him.
After your service as a naval officer, you became a civilian and began working as a bank executive and experienced a very different leadership culture. What did you experience and what did you learn?
Well, I went to the I went to the task of trying to figure out what I was going to do, knowing that I love shipboard duty, but shipboard duty was very difficult on private life, and as a supply officer, I'd be ashore a great deal. So my time as a supply officer and as admiral's aide proved to me that I didn't really like that environment. It was a bit too bureaucratic, not entrepreneurial enough for my taste, and so with great respect, I decided to leave the Navy. I worked full time while I was an admiral's aide to get my MBA in an off-campus MBA program. All that was really very, very valuable, and when I left, when I graduated with my MBA, I left the Navy and I joined what had been touted as the darling of Wall Street for many, many years. Every week in the Wall Street Journal, they would talk about it. And as an MBA student, I was reading the Wall Street Journal every day. And so I thought, quite erroneously, that if I went from this extraordinary and effective organization, the U.S. Navy, to a civilian organization that was bringing in a 42-to-1 price-earnings ratio and was touted as the darling of Wall Street, that I would be stepping out on level land. I was extraordinarily mistaken. What I found was that the organization I joined was hugely adolescent, that individuals were not kind to one another, that people were physically posturing and verbally abusive of one another, that it was an extraordinary example of adolescence where I had come from an organization of adults.
Would you say these two endpoints of an adult culture and an adolescent culture has really informed the work that you've done since in terms of giving you a point of comparison to see and understand the cultures as a consultant?
It has. It's been, I wasn't so bright early on as to be able to describe this spectrum of adult and adolescent behavior. I would talk about it in other terms and hardly so eloquently or simply. But the comparison is just, it is fair. I believe most of the people, most of us, all of us, go from being adolescents to moving toward adulthood. We're lucky if we behave as adults for several minutes each day, and then for hours, and then maybe we can maintain it more as adults than adolescents. The adolescent is characterized by a concern about power and status. They're concerned with fear. They're consumed by apprehension. I really believe that happiness goes to the adult, and the adult has a stability, often centers their life on either what they regard as their higher power. That could be a deity, but it could also be a set of core values that are quite universal in nature, and they can free themselves from the adolescent's anxieties relatively quickly. We have lots of characters in literature who are like this, and many of them are are thought of as wise elders, as the grandparent or the grandmother who's so grounded and helps wisdom to manifest in those in the family. I believe in that. I believe in that's let's say anthropology's plan. I don't see it operating as much as I feel it used to operate. That doesn't mean it won't happen again.
At the center of much of your work is the idea of human brilliance. It is at the core of your positioning and value proposition as a consultant. What is human brilliance to you?
Well, everybody, I believe, has a gift or gifts, to a lesser extent, talents and aptitudes that make things quite easy, make it easy to succeed. Beyond that, the trick is for them to have discovered those, or for life to have helped them enjoy them. The brilliance of each individual is something that I believe in. I believe that's in the potential of everyone. And it doesn't matter how poor they were. If you think of Pelé, the great Brazilian soccer player, he came from zero economics. So we have this potential as human beings, to the extent that we find ourselves confronted and embracing a worthy goal that can open the heart and aid inspiration, to the extent that the endeavor toward that goal is relatively free of the interruptions of insecurity. We can really devote ourselves to learning curves that cause us to ultimately be insightful. When we think of invention or innovation, the bricks in that wall, if you will, the paving stones of invention and innovation are insight. The aha, the satori, the I've got it, the slap in the forehead with the ham of the hand, that where we say, oh my God, why didn't we think about that before? And we laugh. And it's so simple, but it's so brilliant. I have found that organizations can proceed in a way, in a very predictable fashion, to get to insight. And it does not happen in organizations that are disengaged. It does not happen in the presence of an environment of fear and apprehension. It happens when people are embraced and seen and appreciated and athletically encouraged, vigorously encouraged toward excellence.
Bruce, as we come to the end of this conversation, you're also a writer and a photographer, and I'm wondering if you could speak briefly about how being a photographer informs who you are, and how does that artistry serve you?
Well, I reflected on my photography and see that as a little kid, I had those old Kodak cameras, and I'd be on a vacation when I was an adult, and if I didn't have a camera with me, I'd buy those cameras you could purchase at a convenience store that were very simple. As I went forward in life, I had a camera. The camera wasn't the big thing. It was recording. It was being a documentarian of the events, the gatherings, the family reunion, certainly the vacations, and the friends. And then I discovered in 2007, on a trip with some remarkable people to Chaco Canyon in northwestern New Mexico, I discovered that I had an intuition that indicated the shot, the content of the photograph, and I had a gift for composition. Now, since then, I've utilized those with different cameras and with different software for post-production to do documentation largely. That's generally seems to be my orientation. And I get a great deal of pleasure out of it. It's an incredible thing to be told by my intuition, my body, if you will. It's a somatic phenomenon. Take that shot, and to take the shot and then look at it afterwards, improve it as I might in post. I find that it's fun to send those to people, or to take a special one and make it part of a thank you note or a congratulatory note to people. It's rare when anybody asks me about it, as you have here, but I take a great pleasure in it. It has become my hobby.
What matters to you most, Bruce?
Effective relationships, effective teamwork, effective organizations, effective nations. All these as social challenges, social enterprise, if done with great respect, with the embracing of human potential, that would be certainly what would make me I would be very pleased if that were the condition going forward. I maintain the hope that we'll move that way. There's some indication that this is happening in American business. I think sometimes things have to get terribly bad, kind of raucously and caricaturely absurd for individuals who had been on the sidelines to step forward and do something that's constructive, leadership initiative that is helpful to all. I'm hopeful that more and more this will happen. What really matters to me is people working together productively, and there should be enjoyment in that. There's sweat, there's exhaustion often, but I think it's what we're here for, is to produce, to construct, to design and build, and to do that in an athletic harmony, to me, is a great idea.
Bruce Fritch is the managing partner of Fritch Consulting. He works with clients to deepen their capacity to access the full potential of human brilliance in their organizations. He helps leaders get to insight to align corporate purpose with performance excellence. And now a personal word. When I hear Bruce talk about his reflections, I'm reminded of my own love for the artifacts of memory. Here is an edited version of something I once wrote called Cards and Letters. In my garage are bins filled with evidence of a life. Files from college, yearbooks, photographs, film negatives, artwork, sketches, mementos. They are stacked against the wall with tool sets and other garage gear on top of them. I know the bins are there, filled with traces of my life as a younger man. Rarely do I look at any of it. But when I do, there is one bin in particular that draws my attention. Cards and letters from before the age of the internet. The bin, one of those clear plastic ones with a white lid on top, is packed with rubber band-bound correspondence from my dad and mom, from my sisters and my brother, from my friends and lovers. The envelopes are rectangular and boxy, standard size and irregular, domestic and airmail. Postcards are interspersed throughout. All the envelopes are hand-addressed to places I once lived, right down to zip codes I've long forgotten. Stamps in the upper right-hand corner are half the price they are now, all postmarked the day they were sorted and delivered on trains, planes, and automobiles. Inside the envelopes are Hallmark and shoebox cards, and paper folded neatly and in odd shapes, lined and unlined on white, yellow, and blue paper, from writing pads of all sort, with the most personal of handwriting. It's the handwriting that moves me. So alive, so individual, each slant and curve a unique expression, the ink capturing an unreplicatable life essence. All the cards and letters I have are magic, like the silvery recollections that Albus Dumbledore draws from his mind and siphons into his pensieve, allowing him and others to witness what once was. Each card and letter is a memory portal. They transport me to a different time. I am younger, my hair is dark, I hear voices, scenes are played. Sometime in the mid-1990s, the cards and letters stopped. The World Wide Web ushered in a new age, electronic, inkless, paperless. We could type Arial or New Times Roman and send messages at the touch of a button. We would hear the chime that you've got mail. Today, there are smartphones and social media, and the yearning, dreams, and desperations of romance are reduced to instant messaging, texting, and tweets. I get the power of the digital world. I understand what it can do, and I'm invested in using it to change society for the better. But there is something to be said for bent corners, tear stains, and hints of perfume. I'm Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Thank you to my amazing partners, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. We are supported by friends and listeners to this podcast. Please visit us at onlifeandmeaning.com and become a patron of the show. Thank you for listening.